Shalom Israel and happy new moon. Today is the first day of the 12th month, and next month we kick off Passover and unleavened bread. Obviously Passover is on the 14th day of the first month, and it's really not that far off right now, so we need to start preparing. And I would like to share something that I've already been kind of working through in this Living for Him series, where we've been looking at the 9 gifts or the manifestations of the Ruach to help a believer walk like Yahushua Messiah. We've already covered a word of knowledge and a word of wisdom, and today I'd like to talk about discerning of spirits and how it ties into our day and age, and why this spiritual gift is so important for the body. We read about this in 1 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 1, where it says, "Now concerning spiritual gifts, brothers, I do not wish you to be ignorant." Skipping down to verse 10, "And to another the operation of power, and to another prophecy, and to another the discerning of spirits, and to another the kinds of tongues, and to another the interpretation of tongues." So we're going to be looking at what is this discerning of spirits. We also read in 1 John 4:1, "Beloved ones, do not believe every spirit, but prove the spirits whether they are of Elohim, because many false prophets have gone out into the world." Now here we have this idea of discerning spirits and proving the spirits. These two things are really synonymous. This means to distinguish between the spirit that is connected to Yah and also another kingdom, the kingdom of darkness or the demonic kingdom. We need to be able to prove and test, and really we need to know what the standard is. It's really the book, the written instructions of Yah. Matter of fact, in Deuteronomy 13 and 18 it tells us that a false prophet is someone who leads us away from the written instructions of Yah, whether his sign comes to pass or not. I would like to talk a little bit more about this, our enemy, and the demonic kingdom, and so we can better understand who we're dealing with. In the book of Ephesians, we get better insight into this. It says, "Finally, brothers, be strong in Yahuwah and the power of his might, and put on the whole armor of Elohim, that ye may be able to stand against the wiles of the devil." We need not to be ignorant of the devil's devices and strategies and schemes that he's coming against us. He's a spiritual being, and he's going to come after us in these spiritual attacks. "For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against rulers of darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places." It also tells us in John 10:10 that the thief has come to basically kill, steal, and destroy our lives. And in Revelation 12, it says that he is the accuser of the brethren day and night. Day and night he's accusing us. He's trying to kill, steal, and destroy us. And as we see here, the weapons we are not wrestling with flesh and blood. We're wrestling with an invisible kingdom, is truly what we're dealing with. Also in 1 Corinthians or 2 Corinthians chapter 4 verse 3, we get more insight into this. It says, "But if our good news be hid, it's hid to them that are lost, in whom the God of this world has blinded the minds of them which believe not, lest the light of the esteemed good news of Messiah, who is the image of Elohim, should shine upon them. For we preach not ourselves, but Messiah Yahushua, the Master, and ourselves, your servants, for Yahushua's sake." So the God of this world has blinded the minds of those who have not received the good news. And we want to talk about how the enemy has blinded the minds of these individuals that don't believe. And we can go back to 1 John chapter 4 and gain more insight into this by picking up in verse 1, "Beloved ones, do not believe every spirit, but prove the spirits whether they are of Elohim, because many false prophets have gone out into the world. And by this you know the spirit of Elohim. Every spirit that confesses Yahushua Messiah has come in the flesh is of Elohim, and every spirit that does not confess that Yahushua Messiah has come into the flesh is not of Elohim. This is the spirit of anti-Messiah, which you have heard is coming, now already is in the world. You are of Elohim, little children, and have overcome them, because he who is in you is greater than he that is in the world. They are of the world, therefore they speak as of the world, and the world hears them. We are of Elohim, and the one knowing Elohim hears us. He who is not of Elohim does not hear us, and by this we know the spirit of truth and the spirit of delusion. I want to point out two key things there. The first attack the enemy will do is make us not see the door, the entry point into the kingdom, by not understanding who Yahushua Messiah is. Yahushua is the door. He is the way, the truth, and life. No man can come to the Father but through him. So that's the first way the enemy is going to try to block many people, is make them not get into the kingdom via the door. Yes, Yahushua Messiah. The second way that's mentioned here is not hearing the words. The taught ones were given the words from Messiah, and Messiah received the words from the Father. And he says, go out into the nations and teach them everything I have taught you. Those who don't listen to the words of life, the instructions of life, they are not his. They're of the world. And this is the distinction between these two camps. We also read in 2 Thessalonians more insight about the second aspect of not hearing the words, not shemai, not hearing and doing. When we read about the lawless one and the working of Satan, here in 2 Thessalonians 2:9, it's written, the coming of the lawless one is according to the working of Satan, which all power, signs, wonders of falsehood, with all deceit of unrighteousness, and those perishing because they did not receive the love of the truth in order to be saved. For this reason Elohim sends them a working of delusion, for them to believe the falsehood, in order that all should be judged who do not believe the truth, but delighted in unrighteousness. And again here we see this idea of the unrighteous, and we find out in 1 John 5:17 that all unrighteousness is sin. And then in 1 John 3:4 it tells us that sin is lawlessness or Torahlessness, breaking the law, breaking the Torah. And this lawless one, the working of Satan, is in all unrighteousness. The whole point is he's taking people away from the written instruction, whereas they won't receive the truth. What is the truth? Psalm 119, 142. Your righteousness is righteousness forever, and your Torah is truth. His instructions are truth. And the reason I want to bring this up is because right now in America, there's a lot of laws going forth, and there's even just a spirit that we need to really be able to discern what spirit is behind an individual or group. And even in right now, this whole idea of abortion, killing your own child, as Psalms 106 verse 37 says, they killed their sons and daughters and basically sacrificed them to demons. They're listening to a demonic voice, a voice that is basically trying to deceive them, to trick them, to steal their joy, to steal their children, to kill their children, and to destroy their lives. But I want to challenge you, not only is the spirit of abortion that from listening to that demonic kingdom, but anyone that comes to us and tells us the Torah is done away with, that we don't need to apply those words. And unfortunately, many people in the so-called church are listening to pastors that are hearing from another kingdom, that demonic kingdom that's saying we don't have to follow the righteous instructions of life. And when we agree with that voice, we're going to reap the fruit of that relationship. Because if we're listening to that voice and following the enemy, we can become disciples of the devil. And literally, the fruit of that relationship is the curse found in Deuteronomy 28. Sickness, disease, and ultimately death. So that's really the second way the enemy will try to neutralize people. Even if they make a head knowledge belief in the Almighty, if he can get them not to obey the word, basically they're going to become useless for the kingdom, and basically going to be worrying about their own self and their own diseases and everything else going on, because they're living under a curse. And this is really a major problem. So what can we start doing to somewhat fight back? Well, in the book of Hebrews, it gives us some great insight about those who are mature in the belief. Let me get there here real quick. We've already read this passage before in Hebrews chapter 5. Get there. At the end of chapter 5, verses 13 and 14, for everyone partaking of milk is inexperienced in the word of righteousness, for he is a babe. And we'll just keep continuing here. But solid food is for the mature, whose senses have been trained by practice to discern both good and evil. So this walk takes practice. It takes work. And even all these spiritual gifts do take practice to be able to discern the voice of Yah. And we need to be able to have this word implanted in our heart to know what is right versus what is wrong. And Yah can reveal the hidden creature, which I'm going to read here in chapter 4 of Hebrews, where it says, for the word is living, it's working sharper than any two-edged sword, cutting even through even the dividing of being and spirit, of joint and marrow, and is able to judge the thoughts and intentions of the heart. And there is no creature hidden from his sight, and all are naked and laid bare before his eyes of him who is our account. So the word is able to actually discern the hidden creature. And I'll give an example real quick in scripture, because in Acts 16 there was a slave girl who would follow Paul around, or Shaul, and say, these are the servants of the Most High, and they proclaim the way of righteousness. And actually it's interesting because she was proclaiming the truth, but the spirit that was working within her was a spirit of divination. And basically, after a couple of days of this, Paul turned to this young lady and spoke to the spirit, and in the name of Yahushua Messiah, he cast out the spirit out of that woman. And that hour, that spirit left her, and she could no longer make profit for fortune telling. But this is important because we really need to understand the spirit behind a person and things like that. Even if sometimes their words do line up, to be in association with, for example, Paul with them, if people knew what she was involved in, it would have compromised, it would have destroyed their work that they were doing. The kingdom of darkness is very slick, and we need to have this gift of spiritual discernment. And we learn here that the word is one way to identify those things. I would like to also just point out another thing. So we need to put this faith, we need to put these gifts into practice. And as we're getting closer to Passover, I just want to point out that Yah is also making a distinction. We can see the world getting darker and darker for those who have spiritual eyes and have discernment. And at the same time, his people are starting to rise up. So we see in the book of Revelation where the dragon went to fight the remnant. They have two major characteristics. They have the testimony of Yahushua Messiah, and they guard the commandments. And it reminds me of a lot of what happened in the land of Mitzrayim during the Exodus, when a lot of the plagues were hitting Egypt, but they weren't hitting Israel. There was darkness in Egypt, but it wasn't in the land of Goshen. And Yah is going to make a distinction again in these last days with his people that serve him versus those who do not. And this is in Malachi chapter 3, verse 16 through 18. It is written, then shall those who fear Yahuwah speak to one another, and Yahuwah listens and hears. And look, a book of remembrance be written before him of those who fear Yahuwah and those who think upon his name. And they shall be mine, says Yahuwah hosts, on the day that I prepare a treasured possession. And I shall spare them as a man spares his own son who serves him. Then you shall again see the difference between the righteous and the wrong, between the one who serves Elohim and the one who does not serve Elohim. And that's where we're at today. We're at a time and place where the spirit of error, the spirit of delusion, the spirit of the anti-Messiah is very present, and the spirit of lawlessness is present. And we need to be able to understand that that same spirit, that spirit of abortion, is the same spirit that tells us to abort the Torah, to leave, to that voice. We need to cast down that voice, and we need to pay attention to people and the words that they're saying, if they're taking us away from the word of life, that is the spirit behind that is a spirit of error, and we need to be able to discern. So I pray that many more people that are walking into truth would ask for these spiritual gifts, and especially the spiritual gift of discernment, discerning spirits, and that it would definitely equip us in the days ahead. This is a very important gift. There's a lot more that can be said about it, especially dealing with spiritual warfare. But when we come back, I'd like to talk a little bit about tongues. And did tongues actually begin in the so-called New Testament? Well, when we get back, we'll look into this a little bit more. Until next time, shalom.